Falling in Love, Chapter 1. An ancient and famous human institution is in pressing danger. Sir George Campbell have set his face against the time-honored practice of falling in love. Parent and Noble will, it is true, have set their face against it already from immoral antiquity, but then they only attack the particular instant without venturing to impute the institution itself as general principle. An old Indian magistrate, however, goes to work in all things on a different pattern. He would always like to regulate human life generally as a part of India office, and so Sir George Campbell would fain have husband and wife select from one another, perhaps on Dr. Johnson principle, by the Lord Chancellor with a view to the future development of the race, and the process which he not very felicitously or ill-intentionally described as man breeding. Probably he say, as reported in Nature, he have enough psychological knowledge to affect a vast improvement in the pairing of individuals of the same or allied races if we only could apply the knowledge to make fitting marriages. Instead of giving way to the foolish idea about love and the taste of young people, whom we can hardly trust to choose their own bonnet, mothers to choose in a grave matter in which they are most likely to be influenced by frivolously prejudice. He wants, in other words, to discard the deep-seated inner psychological prompting of inherited instinct and to substitute for them some calm and dispassionate but artificial selection of a fitting partner as the father or mother of the future generation. Now, this is of course a serious subject and is out to be treated seriously and reverently, but it seems to me Sir George Campbell's conclusion is exactly the opposite one from the conclusion now being forced upon men of science by study of the biological and psychological element in this very complex problem of heredity, so far from considering love as a foolish idea opposed to the best interests of the race. I believe most competent psychologists I believe most competent physiologists and psychologists, especially those of the modern evolutionary school, would regard it rather as an essentially beneficent and conservative instinct developed and maintained in us by natural cause, for the very purpose of ensuring just those precise advantages and improvement which Sir George Campbell think he could himself effect by a conscious and deliberate process of selection. More than that, I believe for my own part, and I feel so, most evolutionists would cordially agree with me, and that this beneficent inherited instinct of falling in love affects the object it has in view far more admirably, subtly, and satisfactorily on the average of instincts than any clumsy human selective substitutes can possibly affect it. And sure, my doctrine is simply the old-fashioned and confining belief that marriage are made in heaven with the further corollary that heaven managed them, one time with another a great deal better than Sir George Campbell. Let's first look at the following love effects, the standards of human efficiency. Then let us consider what we would be the probable result of any definite conscious attempts to substitute it for some more deliberate external agency. Falling in love, as modern biology teaches us to believe in nothing more than the latest and the highest and most involved exemplification in human race of the almost universal selective process which Mr. Darwin has enabled us to recognize throughout the whole long series of the animal kingdom. The butterfly that circled and the eddy in his aerial dance around his observant mate is endeavoring to charm her by the delicacy of his coloring and to overcome her coldness by the display of his skill. The peacock that struck about in imperiled pride under the eyes of his attentive hens is really contributing to the future beauty and strength of his race by collecting to himself a harem through whom he hands down to posterity the valuable quality which have gained the adoration of his mate and his own person. Mr. Wallace has shown that to be beautiful is to be efficient, and sexual selection is thus, as it were, a mere lateral form of neutral a mere lateral form of natural selection, a survival of the fittest, and the gust of mutual attractiveness and mutual adaptability produce on the average a maximum of the best properties of the race in the resulting offspring. I did not dwell here upon the aspect of the cause because it is one with which, since the publication of the Descents of Man, all the world has been sufficiently familiar. In our own species, the selective process is marked by all the features common to selection throughout the whole animal kingdom, but it is also, as might be expected, far more specialized, far more individualized, far more cognizant of personal trait and minor particularities. It is furthermore exerted to a far greater extent upon mental and moral as well as physical particularity in the individuals. We cannot fall in love with everybody alike. Some of us fall in love with one person, some with another. This instinctive and deep seated differential feeling we may regard as the outcome of a complementary features mental, moral, or physical in the two persons concerned, and experience show us that in 9 cases out of 10 it is a reciprocal affection. This is to say, in other words, an affection rose in unison by various quality in the respective individual. Of its eminent conservative and even upward tendency, very little doubt can be reasonably entertained. We do not fall in love, take us in the lumps which the young, the beautiful, the strong, the healthy. We do not fall in love, taking us in the lumps with the aged, the ugly, the feeble, and the sickly. The prohibition of the church is scarcely needed to prevent a man from marrying his grandmother. More or less, of its eminent conservative and even upward tendency, very little doubt can be reasonably entertained. We do fall in love, taking us in the lumps with the young, the beautiful, the strong, and the healthy. We do not fall in love, taking us in the lumps with the aged, the ugly, the feeble, and the sickly. The prohibition of the church is scarcely needed to prevent a man from marrying his grandmother. More or less have always borne a special grudge to Preface. But as Mr. Herbert Spencer admirably put it, long before the appearance of Darwin's selective theory, the saying that beauty is but skin deep is itself but a skin deep saying. In reality, beauty is one of the very best guide we can possibly have to the desirability, as far as race preservation is concerned, of any man or any woman as a partner in marriage. A fine form, a good figure, a beautiful bust, and a round arm and neck, a fresh complexion, a lovely face, and all outward and visible sign of a physical quality that on the whole conspire to make up a healthy and a vigorous wife and mother. They imply soundless fertility, a good circulation, a good digestion. Conversely, shallow and patness are roughly indicative of dyspepsia and anemia. A flat chest is a symptom of deficient maternity, and what we call a bad figure is really, in one way to another, an unhealthy departure from the general normal and standards of the race. Good teeth mean good good deglutition. A clear eye mean an active liver. Scrubbedness and undersizedness mean ver- feeble virility, nor are indication of mental and moral efficiency, by any means wanting as recognized element in person beauty. A good, a good humored face is in itself almost pretty. A pleasant smile half redeem unattractive features. A low retreating forehead strike us unfavorably. Heavy stolid, half idiotic countenance, heavy, stolid, half idiot countenance can never be beautiful. However, regard regular their line and counter intelligence and goodness are almost as necessary as healthy and vigor in order to make up our perfect ideal of a beautiful human face and figures. The Apollo the Apollo Belvedere is no fool. The murder in the Chamber of Horror at the Madame Tussauds are for the most part no beauty. What we all fall in love with then as a race is the most case efficiency and ability. What we each fall in love with individual is, I believe, our moral, mental, and physical complement. Not our likes, not our counterparts, quite the contrary. Wit and healthy limits are unlike and are opposite, that is, so as long as more or less a commonplace of ordinary conversation that it is scientifically true, one time with another when we take an extended range of cases may, I think, be almost demonstrated by sure and certain warranty of human nature. Brother and sister have more in common mentally and physically than any other member of the same race can possibly have with one another, but nobody fall in love with his sister. A profound instinct has taught us even the lower race of men, for the most part, to avoid such union of all but identical. In higher race, the ideal never so much as occurred to us. Even cousin seldom fall in love, seldom, that is to say, in comparison with the frequent opportunity of intercourse, endangering relatively to the remainder of general society. When we do and when they carry out their perilous choice effectively by marriage, natural selection and soon avenge nat- nature upon the offspring by cutting off the idiots, the consumptive, the weakling, and the cripple who often result from such consanguineous marriage, and narrow communities where breeding and became almost inevitable. Natural selection has similarly to exert itself upon a crowd of Cretan and other hapless incompatible, in well and open champagne champagne countries where individual choice have free room for exercise, men and women as a rule, if not constrained by parents and moralists, marry for love and marry on the whole their natural complement. They prefer outsiders, fresh blood, somebody who comes from beyond the community. To the people of their own immediate surrounding, and many men, they dislike to marry amongst the folks with whom they have been brought up amounts almost be positive instant. They feel it as impossible to fall in love with a fellow town woman as to fall in love with other own first cousin. Among exogamous tribes such as Instant, aided of course by other extraneous cause, has hardened into a custom, and there is reason to believe from the universal trace among the higher civilization of marriage by capture, that all the leading race of the world were ultimately derived from exogamous ancestor, possessing their beauty and excellent sentiment. In the minor matter, it is of course universally admitted that short men, as a rule, prefer tall women, while tall men admire little women. Dark pairs by preference with fair, and the commonplace often runs after the original. People have long noticed that this attractive towards one opposite tends to keep true the standard of the race. They have not perhaps so generally observed that it is also indicated roughly the existence in either individuals of a desire for its own natural complement. It is difficult here to give definite example, but everybody knows how in the subtle psychology of falling in love. But there are involved innumerably minor elements, physical and mental, which strike us exactly because of their absolute adaptation. To form with ourselves an adequate union, of course, we do not d- definitely seek out and discover such quality. Instinct work far more far more intuitively than that. But we find at last by subsequent observation have true and more trustworthy or it immediate indication. That is to say, those men who do so, who were wise enough to, or fortunate enough, to follow the earliest prompting of their own heart and not to be ashamed of that divinest of deepest of human institution, and not be ashamed of that divinest and deepest of human institution, love at first sight. How very subtle this institution How very subtle this intuition is, we can only guess in part by the apparent capriciousness and incomprehensibility of its occasional action. We know that some men and women fall in love easily, while others are only moved to love by some very special and singular combination of particularity. We know that one man is readily stirred by every pretty face he sees, while other men can only be roused by intellectual quality or by moral beauty. We know that sometimes we meet people possessing very virtue and grace under heaven, and yet for some unknown and incomprehensible reason, we could no more fall in love with them than we could fall in love with the Ten Commandments. I don't, of course, for a moment accept the silly romantic notion that men and women fall in love only once in their life, or that each one of us have somewhere on earth his or her exact affinity, whom we must sooner or later meet or else die unsatisfied. Almost every healthy Norman or woman have probably fallen in love over and over again in the course of a lifetime, except in case of very early marriage, and could easily find dozens of person with whom they would be capable of falling in love again if the occasion offer. We do not all create and pair like the executialists, exactly intended to fit into one another minor idiosyncrasies. Men and women, as a rule, very sensibly fall in love with one another in the particular place and the particular society they happen to be cast among. A man at Alshbidi Halzoch does not hunt the world over to find his pre-established harmony at Perrelli Monroe or at Denver, Colorado. But among the women he actually meets, a vast number are purely indifferent to him. Only one or two here and there strike him in the light of possible wife, and only one in the last resort, outside Salt Lake City, approved herself to his inmost nature as the actual wife of his final selection. Now, this very indifference to the vast mass of our fellow countrymen or countrywomen, this extreme pitch of selective preference in the human species is just one mark of our extraordinary specialization, one stamp and a token of our high supremacy. The brute do not so pick and choose, though even there, as Darwin have shown, selection play a large part, for the very butterfly are coiled and must be wooed and won. It is only in the human race itself that selection descends into such minute, such subtle, such indefinable discrimination. Why should a universal and common impulse have in our case this special limit? Why should we be by nature so fastidious and so diversely affected. Surely for some good and sufficient purpose, no deep-seated ones of our complex life would be so narrowly restricted without a law and a meaning. Sometimes we can in part explain its condition. Here we see that beauty plays a great role. There we recognize the importance of strength, of manners, of grace, of moral quality. Vivacity, as Mr. Galton justly remarked, is one of the most powerful among human attraction, and often account for what might otherwise seem unaccountable preferences. But after all is said and done, there remain a vast mass of instinctive and inexplicable element, a powerful and deeper and more marvelous in its inscrutable ramification than human consciousness. What on earth we say could be so and so see and so to fall in love with them. What on earth we say could so and so to fall in love with. This very inexplicably this very inexplicable I take to be the sign and seal of profound importance. As instant, so conditioned, so curious, so vague, so unfathomable as we may guess by analogy, with all other instant must be nature guiding voice within this, speaking for the good of human race and all future generation. On the other hand, let us suppose for a moment an possible super supposition that mankind could conceivably divest itself of those foolish ideas about love and the taste of young people, and could hand over the choice of partner for life to a committees of anthropologists presided over by Sir George Campbell. Would the committees manage things, I wonder, very much better than the Creator has managed them? And where would they obtain the intimate knowledge of individuals' structure and function and differences which would enable them to join together in a holy matrimony fitting and complementary idiosyncrasies is a living man with all his organs and power fa- and faculty and disposition. So simple and easy, a problem to reach that everybody else can r- readily undertake to pick out offhand a helpmeet for him. I throw not a man is not a horse or a terrier. You cannot discern his point by simple inspection. You cannot see a priority by a Hanoverian bandman and his heavy, ignorant, uncultured wife should conspire to produce a Sir William Herschel. If you try to improve the breed artificially, either by choice from outside or by the creation of an independent moral sentiment, irrespective of that instinctive preference which we call falling in love, I believe that so far from improving man, you would only do one of two things: either spoil his constitution or reproduce a tame stereotype partner of amiable imbecility. You would crush out our initiative, all all spontaneity, all diversity, all originality. You would get an animated moral code instead of a living man and woman. Look at the analogy of domestic animal. This is the analogy to which reading reformers always point with special pride. But what does it really teach us? That you can't improve the efficiency of animal in any part to any high degree without upsetting the general balance of their constitution. The racehorse can run a mile on a particular day at a particular place, bar incident with wonderful speed, but that is about all he's good for. His health as a whole is so surprisingly feeble that he has to be treated with as much care as a delicate exotic. In regards to animal and plant, say Sir George Campbell, we have very largely mastered the principle of heredity and culture, and the mode by which good qualities may be maximized, bad quality minimized. True, so far as concerns a few point process by ourselves for our own purpose, but in doing so we have so loaded the general constitution, vigor of plants or animals that our vine fall an easy prey to odium and phylloxera. Our potatoes to the potatoes, the these disease and the Colorado beetles. Our sheep are stupid, our rabbits idiotic. Our domestic breed generally threatens with dangers to life and limbs unknown to their weary ancestor in the wild state. I mean, one comes to deal with the infinitely more complex individuality of men. What hopes would there be of our improving the breeds by deliberate selection? If we developed the intellect, we would probably stun the the physic or the moral nature. If we aim at a general culture of all faculty alike, we would probably end by a Chinese uniformly of mediocre death levels. The balance of organs and faculty in a race is a very delicate organic equilibrium. How delicate we now know from thousands of examples. For from the correlation of seemingly unlike part from the well-spread effects of small condition from the utter dying out of a race like the Tasmanian or the Paraguay Indian under circumstances different from those with which their ancestors were familiar. What folly to interfere with a marvelous instinct which now preserves this balance and act in favor of our untried artificial system, which would probably wreck it as helpless as the modern system of higher education for women is wrecking the maternal power of the best class in our English community. And then within the race itself, as is now exists, free choice aid by natural selection is actually improving every good point, and is for every weeding all the occasional failures and shortcomings of nature. For weakly children, feeble children, and stupid children, and heavy children are undoubtedly born under this very regime of falling in love, whom average result I believe to be so highly beneficial. How is this? Well, one has to take into consideration 2 points in seeking for the solution of that obvious problem. In the first place, no instinct is absolutely perfect. All of them necessarily fail at some point. If on the average they do good, they are sufficiently justified. Now, the material with which you have to start in this case is not perfect. Each man marries even in favorable circumstances, not the abstractly best adapted wife in the world to supplement or counteract his individual's particularities, but the best woman then and there obtainably for him. The result is frequently far from perfect. All I claim is that is it would be as best or a good ideal worse if somebody else make the choice for him, or if he made the choice himself on abstract, biological, and eugenic principle, and indeed the very existence of better and worse in the world is a condition precedence of all upward evolution. Without an overstocked world with individuals variation, some progressive, some retrograde, there could be no natural selection, no survival of the fittest. That is the chief besettling danger of cut and dry doctrinaire view. Malthus was a very great man, but if his principle of prudential restraints were fully carried out, the prudence would cease to reproduce their like, and the world would be peopled in a few generations by the hereditarily reckless and dissolute. and impudent. Even so, if eugenic principle were universally adopted, the chance of exceptional and elevated nature would be largely reduced, and natural selection would be, in so much, interfere with or sensible retarded. In the second place, again, it must not be forgotten that falling in love has never yet among civilized men at least had a fair field and no favors. Many marriages are arranged on a very different grounds of convenience, grounds of cupidity, grounds of religion, grounds of snobbishness. snobbishness. In many cases, it is clearly demonstrated that such marriages are productive in the highest degree of evil consequences. Take the case of heiresses. An heiress is almost by necessity the one last feeble and flickering relic of a moribund stock, often of a stock reduced by the sordid pursuit of ill-gotten wealth almost to the very verge of actual insanity. But let her be ever so ugly, ever so unhealthy, ever so hysterical, ever so mad, somebody or other will be ready and eager to marry her on any term. Consideration of this sort have helped to stock the world with many feeble and unhealthy persons. Among the middle and upper class, it may be safely said only a very small percentage of marriage is ever due to love alone. In other words, to instinctive feelings. The remainder have been influenced by various side advantage, and nature has taken their vengeance accordingly on the unhappy offspring. Parents and moralists are ever ready to drown her voice and to counsel marriage within one own class among nice people with a really religious girls and so forth ad infinitum. By many well-meaning young people, these deadly interferences with natural impulse are accepted as part of a higher and nobler law of conduct. The rigid belief that one should subordinate the prompting of one's own soul to the dictate of a miscalculating and misdirecting prudence has been instilled into the mind of girls especially, until at last many of them have almost come to look upon their natural instincts as wrong, and the immoral race-destructive counsel of their seniors or advisor as the truth and purest earthly wisdom. Among certain small religious sects, again, such as the Quakers, the duty of marriage and has been strenuously inculcated, and stronger-minded only the stronger-minded and more individualistic members have had courage and initiative enough to disregard precedent and to follow the internal divine monitor as against the externally imposed laws of their particular communities. Even among wider bodies, it is commonly held that Catholic must not marry a Protestant, and the abnormal result obtained by the mixture of Jewish with the European blood have almost always been reached by male Jew having the temerity to marry Christian women in the face of opposition and persecution from their co-nationalists. It is very rarely indeed that a Jew would accept a European for a husband in so many ways, and on so many grounds. Does convention interfere with the plain and evident dictate of nature? Against all such evil parental prompting, however, a great safeguard is afforded to society by the wholesome and essentially philosophical teaching of romance and poetry. I do not approve of novels. They are for the most part a futile and unprofitable form of literature of, of literature, and it may profoundly be regretted that the mere blind and it may profoundly be regretted that the mere blind loss of supplies and demand should have diverted such an immense number of the Albus mind and the England, France, and America from more serious subjects to the production of such very frivolous and the whole ephemeral work of art. But the novel has this one great counterpose of undoubted goods to set against all the manifold disadvantages and rarely in shortcoming of romantic literature. That it always appears to true internal prompting of the inherited instinct and opposes the foolish and shellfish suggestion of interest outsiders. It is the perpetual protest of poor banished human nature against expect the expelling pitchfork of calculating expediency in the matrimonial market, while parents and moralists are forever saying, don't marry for beauty, don't marry for inclination, don't marry for love, marry for money, marry for social position, marry for advancement, marry for our convenience, not for your own. The Romance writer is forever urged, on the other hand, marry for love and for love only. His great theme in all age has been the opposition between parental or other external wishes and the true prompting of the young and the unsophisticated human heart. He has been the chief ally of sentiment and of nature. He has filled the head of all our girls with that Sir George Campbell described offhand as foolish ideas about love. He has preserved us from the hateful convention of civilization. He has halted the claim of personal attraction of the mysterious native yearning of heart for heart, of the indefinite and the indescribable element of mutual selection, and in so doing, he has unconsciously proved himself the best friend of human improvement and the deadliest enemy of all those hideous social lies, which warp us from the living truth. His mission is to diverse the world from Dr. Johnson and Sir George Campbell. For strange to say, it is the moralists and the doc- doctrinaire who are always in the wrong. It is the sentimentalism and the rebel who are always in the right in this matter. If the common moral maximum of societies could have had their way, if we have had our chosen our wife and our husband, not for their beauty or their manliness, not for their eyes or their mustaches, not for their attractiveness or vivacity, but for their sterling qualities of mind and character. We should now doubtless be a miserable race of prig and bookworm, of marnet and puritans, of nervous, invalid, and feeble idiots. It is because our young men and maiden will not hearken to these penny-wise apathem and shallow sophistry, because they often prefer Romeo and Juliet to the whole duties of men, and a beautiful face to a round balance at could that we still preserve some vitality and some individual's features in spite of our grinding and cruising civilization. The man who marries balance, as Mr. Galton has shown, happily died out. leaving none to represent them. The men who marry women they have been weak enough and silly enough to fall in love with rescue the race with fine and vigorous and intelligent. Children, fortunately, compounds of the complementary traits derive from two fairly contrast and mutually reinforcing individuality. I've spoken throughout for argument's sake, as though the only interests to be considered in the marriage relation were the interests of the offspring and so ultimately of the race at large, rather than of the person themselves who enter into it. But I do not quite see why each generation should thus be sacrificed to the welfare of the generation thus afterward succeeded. Now, it is one of the strongest points in favor of the system of falling in love that it does, by common experiment in the vast majority of instances, assort together persons who subsequently prove themselves thoroughly congenial and helpful for one another, and thus this result I look upon as one great proof of the real value and importance of the instinct. Most men and women select for themselves partners for life at an age when they know but little of the world, when they judge but superficially of character and motive, when they still make many mistakes in the conduct of life and in the estimation of change. Yet most of them find in after day that they have really chosen out all the world one of the person best adapted by native idiosyncrasies to make their joint life enjoyable and useful. I make every allowances for the effects of habit, for the growth of sentiment, for the gradual approximation of taste and sympathy, but surely even so it is a common consciousness with every one of us who has been long married that we could hardly conceivably have made ourselves happy with any of the partners whom other have chosen, and we and that we have actually made ourselves so with the partner we chose for ourselves under the guidance of an almost unyearning native instinct. Yet adaptation between husband and wife, so far as their own happiness is concerned, can have had comparatively little to do with the evolution of instinct. As compared with adaptation for the joint production of vigorous and successful offspring, natural selection lays almost all the stress on the last point and hardly any at all upon the first one. If then the instinct is found on the whole so trustworthy in the minor matters especially been fashioned, for which it has not specially been fashioned, how far more trustworthy and valuable must it probably prove in the greater matter? Greater. I mean as regards the interests of the race for which it has been mainly or almost solely developed. I do not doubt that as the world goes on, a deeper sense of moral responsibility in the matter of marriage will grow up among us, but it will not take the false direction of ignoring this or profundest and hottest instinct. Marriage for money may go, marriage for ranks may go, marriage for position may go, but marriage for love, I believe and trust, will last forever. Men in the future will probably feel that a union with their cousin or near relation near relation is positively wicked. That a union with those to like them in person or disposition is at least undesirable. That a union based upon consideration of wealth or any other consideration, save consideration of an immediate natural impulse, is based and disgraceful. But to the end of time, they will continue to feel, in spite of doctrinaire, doctrinaire that the voice of nature is better far than the voice of the Lord Chancellor or the Royal Society, and the instinctive desire for a particular helpmate is a sure guide for the ultimate happiness.
both of the race and of the individuals, than any amounts of deliberate consult consultation. It is not the foolish fancy of youth that will have to be got rid of, but the foolish and wicked and mischievous interference of parents or outsiders.